Welcome to our Divorce Periscope program. We're very happy that you've joined us, and we're hoping by the end of this evening you will have learned a lot more about how children experience divorce and how we should handle it in the legal system and in the family system. We're very honored today to have Reb Brooks with us. I will introduce him in a minute. I'm Keila Gilbert. I'm an attorney and a mediator, and I founded Alpha Center for Divorce Mediation 20 years ago. We have a 7-step divorce mediation program that works hard to make sure we address all the issues during divorce, get families through it without going through court battles, the expense, the heartache, the stress. And it seems to be very, very much appreciated by families going through divorce. Over the 20 years, we've helped over 5,000 people go through the divorce, our 7-step divorce program, and we get a 95% approval rating. So I think we're doing something right. Now I want to again introduce Reb Brooks, who's been with Alpha Center for many years, and he's a great asset. I'm going to let him describe his background and his perspective on our program and what he does outside of our program.
Okay. Well, it's a pleasure to be here. I am Reb Brooks. I'm a licensed psychologist. I've been practicing psychology now for about 35 years. And I have a private practice in Doylestown. Through the practice, I do clinical work, seeing couples, individuals, families, and I've done that for quite some time. And a number of years ago, I did get involved with Alpha, doing the therapist mediations with Alpha. And the part that therapists do with Alpha is we meet with the parties who are separating, divorcing, and help them come up with a parenting plan for their children. The counterpart that I do for that is I also do custody evaluations for families who are not able to come to agreement and who are going through litigation. And it's quite a different process that I think we'll be talking more about when you go through litigation. And my role there is to do the custody evaluations and provide the court with information, or provide the attorneys of the different parties with information that I would deem is in the best interest of children in terms of a custody plan.
Okay, so let me start by describing our 7-step program, and then I'll turn it over to you. You can talk a little bit about what you do within our program and then how you handle it when you're working for litigation attorneys. Mm-hmm. So when I started this program all those years ago, one of my main goals was to protect children, because I'd seen so many children suffer so much as a result of their parents not getting along and deciding to divorce. They got used as pawns in the process, and it ended up being very damaging. So your first step at Alpha Center is you come to a consultation with an attorney who assesses your situation, gives you some good general legal guidance, and then when you decide to begin the program, you go through the 7 steps. Not everyone needs all of the 7 steps, but here's how they go. First, of course, is a consultation. Second is the meeting with the therapist mediator to develop a parenting plan. It's not by accident that that's the second thing they do. That sends the message to them that the kids are the most important aspect of all of the decisions they have to make. And so we ask them to make the children's decisions first, and then build the financial and all the other extraneous issues around those decisions. After the decisions are made, where do they spend the night? When do they go on vacations? When do you introduce new relationships? All of those important issues that affect the children. Then you go on to step 3, which is to divide the assets, do all of the calculations, all of the financial matters. After that, step 4, we have a accountant come in and do tax planning, because that is an important way to ensure that you increase cash flow. And every time you divide households, you have more of a cash flow problem. So that's really important to get that resolved. As well as, if you don't do it as part of the program, it's going to come up within the next year. So we want to make sure that you've resolved everything. So we get the kids and the finances and the taxes taken care of. Then we get the agreement in place, and then the court proceedings generally happen by mail. And we have a step in the program where we look toward the future and ensure that you're financially sound, that your relationship is your co-parenting relationship and your other relationships are healthy. So those are our 7 steps in the Alpha program. And now I'm going to turn it over to you, Reb, and maybe you can talk a little bit about what you do in the Alpha program, and then talk about what you do in litigation.
Okay. With Alpha, one of the things I do with Alpha is I oversee the therapist mediators. As Keila said, the second meeting, essentially one of the first real work meetings, I think, in some ways, is the parenting meeting. And that's where we have therapists act as mediators in these situations. And I think that's valuable, because we're not there to do therapy with the parents. What we're there to do is help them come to agreements. We're there to offer our expertise in what is best for children in situations. So parents during this meeting have an opportunity to bounce questions off us as to what kinds of things we think might be best for their children. But really what we're there to do is help the parents come to agreement on what is best for their children. And I would have to say, in both situations, the therapist therapist mediator in the Alpha situation and the psychologist evaluator in the litigated situation is there to try and identify what's in the best interest of the children. One of the differences is, with the mediation process, the parents are the ones who are driving what is occurring for the children. They're the ones who are making the decisions about what's best for the children.
Yeah, Brad, could you just elaborate on the kinds of, I know I touched on them, but could you elaborate on the range of decisions that are made during that parenting mediation as part of the Alpha 7-step program?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, the primary thing, most with the custody, there's, I don't want to get legal about it because I'm not an attorney, so everything I'm saying is coming from the perspective of a psychologist.
Okay.
But
we'll give you a pass.
In terms of custody, you're basically looking at 2 types of custody. There's legal custody, which is a parent's legal rights as a parent. I have been with Alpha, as Keila said, for quite a few years, and I would have to say I've never seen a case where the parents did not share joint legal custody.
But isn't that true in the legal system also?
It is true in the legal system. The majority of the cases, the parents continue to share joint legal custody. But I have seen cases in that area where that's not the case, where a parent has lost their legal custody of the child, and it's gone solely to one parent versus the other.
And I would imagine that's a pretty extreme
Those are extreme situations. It's where a parent is really not competent to be making decisions or provide for the safety of the child.
And my understanding is that in the court system, the litigated divorce system, they err on the side of granting rights to a parent who maybe, has issues that make it challenging for them to be a good parent. They err on the side of protecting parental rights.
There's a lot done to protect parental rights, and I think that's appropriate. There's no move to try to take away a parent's legal rights of their children. So as you say, it needs to be a fairly egregious situation for a parent to lose their parental rights. In some cases, there are times where, I think there are cases where it could be best for a child, but those need to be pretty extreme and they need to be clearly demonstrated.
And we got a little bit off course,
Right.
and I want to go back to when you're in the Alpha 7-Step program and you're meeting with those parents, they're talking to you about what they know about their children. You're talking to them about what you know about what children need. What are, if you can just tick off the names or some of the decisions, the important decisions that are made.
Two of the basic situations that we're looking at, or decisions that we're talking about, are the physical custody of the children. Who are they going to spend the time with? Which parent, and how's that going to be broken up? Is it going to be a situation where the parents share custody, and that's where they each have an equal number of overnights? And do the parents think that's best to have it on a Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, or the weekend schedule, or are they looking at a week-to-week schedule? Those types of things.
Does that, I know that the parents are making the decisions and you're making recommendations. Do those decisions revolve around the age and stage of the child? And maybe you can speak to that.
That's something I think where the therapist can be helpful. For example, a parent might suggest that you have a week-to-week custody schedule. And that's a very viable, reasonable schedule in some situations. That would be where the child is with one parent for a week, and then they're with the other parent for a week, and then they alternate back and forth. Most therapists, I certainly would not recommend that for a child that's under 5 years of age, for example. I think that's too long a period of time for a child that young to go without seeing a parent. If we look at Piaget's theories of cognitive development, children at that age aren't able to hold an image of the parent long, so it would be too drastic a change for them to make that. So a therapist mediator in that situation might suggest, why don't you break it up more so that there's less time that the child goes without a parent.
And remembering, you're describing the second step in the Alpha 7-Step divorce mediation program. Suppose you have a couple sitting there and they don't agree. They want to have equal time and they're fighting for more time. How do you handle that?
I think the things that we try to do are talk to them about what is best for your child here and what are the reasons you're requesting the time. We're not trying to get into any type of situation where we're the evaluator of that. We are not in an evaluation process when we're doing mediation. We're not trying to be there and suggest to the parents that, oh, I don't think it would be good to spend that much time with this parent versus that parent. We're there to help them come to an agreement, help them look realistically at how does distance, for example, affect custody. It seems pretty simple, I think, but people often don't realize that the closer you live, the easier it is to have a shared custody. Distance makes it harder.
And I have to think there's nothing more near and dear to any of us than our children. So I can imagine that when you're in that room with those two parents who have made the wise decision to mediate instead of litigate, but I can imagine that there's struggle.
Oh, absolutely.
And how do you navigate that, I guess, is the question.
I think for most parents, this is one of the hardest things they'll go through. And I think in a lot of cases, it's probably the hardest part of the mediation divorce process is this decision of how do we divide time with our children. Most parents do not want to do that in any regard. A very difficult time we have, which is another step in the process, is looking at how the parents are going to divide holidays. And I know that I've seen a lot of parents get, they're able to do a lot of it, and then we start talking about, okay, who has them Christmas Eve into Christmas morning? And that becomes a very, emotional thing. They don't want to deal with those issues.
Yeah, it's got to be hard. You're used to waking up with that child every day, and all of a sudden you're working out a plan where you're not going to see them every day and every holiday. So it has to be really an emotional challenge.
Very much so.
Yeah.
And again, we are not there to be doing therapy. It's not a therapy session. If we did that, it could go on forever. But we are there to be supportive. We're there
Okay.
to acknowledge their feelings, acknowledge that this is difficult, but always bring it back to, but what can you feasibly work out that's best for
The
your children?
decisions need to be made, and how are you going to make them? Let's just touch on what you mentioned before about needing maybe longer term therapy. If you're in the Alpha program, you're dealing with a couple, getting them to these decisions, do you sometimes recommend that they go for further counseling to help them work through those issues that are giving them difficulty?
Very much so. Alpha, I think, is great too, in that we do have a resource. We have a resource of therapists in the area that we have spoken to, that we know that we can comfortably recommend to parents. This might be somebody you'd want to talk to, and we give them choices. It's not go to this person or anything, but choices that they might want to go work some things out. And another thing, in one of the sections of it, we try to let them know that since they are coming to these agreements about their children, they have the ability to alter things as things change. And it doesn't mean having to get attorneys and go to court and go through a whole lengthy process of battling out a change in the custody plan in court. And one of the things we'll recommend, if you're not agreeing about something that you think needs to change with custody, try going to a therapist first. Try sitting down, the two of you, with a third party, and try to help that person assist you in weighing out what is best for your child.
It's interesting you say that, because over the years as I've worked with couples, and I've seen some pretty high conflict couples, but having a knowledgeable, neutral person in the room changes the dynamic, and people do seem to accomplish more than they could ever imagine.
Well, just as you said earlier, it's incredibly emotional dealing with these situations. And lots of times when the parents are just together dealing with these things, the emotions start to take over. And when you sit down with a third party, they can start to help you pull back from the emotions and begin to use your head as to what is going to be best for the child.
Yeah. Sometimes when you're angry or hurt or anxious or scared, it's like your brain's on fire, and you're not thinking as well, and that neutral person
Can
sort
help
of
ground things.
puts the fire out and gets you thinking. Before we move from the Alpha 7-step program into full-blown litigation, I wanted to talk about one other issue that comes up fairly regularly. As I said earlier, we have a very, very good batting average in our program, 95% client approval, 85% client completion of the program. And I give most of the credit to the clients. They're good people in a difficult situation. But they come through the program. I've watched this over the years, and everything gets settled, and then there's a new relationship. And when the new relationship of either or both parties starts up, the phone rings, and all of a sudden there's contention. And I know in the parenting mediation step of our program, you address those coming relationships. Maybe you can speak to
Well, that is interesting. I sometimes take a look at it and try to figure out what are the easier mediations to do. One thing I would like to say is the parenting mediation that we do is a 2-hour meeting.
which is phenomenal.
And I can remember when Keila brought me in to do this, and she sat down and said, "You're going to do a parenting mediation, and it's going to be 2 hours." I almost left and said, "Forget it.
No can do.
What are you dreaming about
Yeah,
here? That
yeah.
you cannot do that in 2 hours." And I have done, I can't count how many I've done, and precious few of them have ever had to go beyond the 2 hours. But one of the things that can be difficult sometimes in coming up with a plan is the parents who are getting along really well and are very amicable, because what they want to do is they say, "Oh, that's not going to be a problem for us. How do you want to divide Christmas? Oh, we can work that out. We're not going to have a problem. We want to do what's best for the children, and so we'll just agree to that." Or a big one is birthdays, and they say things like, "We'll share birthdays," and they want to put in the agreement every year the parents will share a birthday party for the child. And I have to say to them, and I don't want to stir up problems or anything, but I have to say to them, give that some thought. That sounds good now, but think about it. Or Christmas morning. You can come over Christmas morning and have Christmas with us. How are you going to feel about that when Dad is bringing his new girlfriend over Christmas morning with him, or Mom is with her new partner, that kind of thing? That can change things. So we really help parents try to come up with a plan that will work. And if they want to be flexible, if they want to invite a parent over Christmas morning, they're welcome to do that. But we don't suggest writing that in a plan.
And you have an alternative in place if there is an agreement, and I find that challenge too. There's a misconception that you have to get along to succeed in mediation. And
That's
I can
not true.
tell you from years of experience that we've had some pretty angry, contentious people, but they still have that light bulb on that tells them, if we do it here, it's going to be so much better for us. It's
Right.
going to save us so much money. But when they walk in the door, from the minute they walk in the door, we try to get them focused on the future. And that's hard because there's so much up in the air. But this is an issue that oftentimes, well, let me back up. A fair number of times there's been an affair or a relationship, and it's already going on. And of course that
creates a lot of feelings.
It puts the temperatures up. But just as often, they don't have that element, and they're working together. They just don't want to be married. And I find the same thing when you're dealing with the financial issues. Oh, we don't need to divide that. We're getting along. It'll work out. And we know from our experience that things change. And I tell them that the best thing we can do for them, and it sounds counterintuitive, but the best thing we can do for them is treat them like they're going to be enemies in the future. Then we'll build a solid agreement. We'll hope that they remain cordial and respectful. But
This
if
will work
something,
if they don't.
this is a fallback. And I think that's what you're talking about in the parenting.
I think another thing we do too is you talk about new relationships. We do talk about the impact that new relationships have on children. And part of it, we do get on our soapbox a little bit and talk about the idea of children adjust more slowly to these changes than parents often do. And parents are very often, I have to say, Match.com and things like that. I will talk to people that they agree to separate, and each of them is out on Match.com before they've even moved out of the house. And I think something is really important, and we will sometimes assist them in putting together a statement in it about when is it okay to introduce a new partner to your children.
And what do you recommend in terms of the timing?
I think that's something. It's not. There's no thing that it should be 3 months, 6 months, that kind of thing. But I think parents need to be really clear that this relationship is a committed long-term relationship. That before I introduce my children, I tell the story often of a boy I was seeing in therapy, actually, and he came into me one time and said, "Oh, Mom has a new Steve." I said, "What?" And he said, "Yeah, Mom has a new Steve." And he said, "I mean boyfriend. My dad and Mom separated, and within a month, my mom was going out with Steve, and she brought him home and was introducing him basically as my stepdad." That lasted about 3 weeks, and the next guy she had, his name was Steve too. And so now when Mom has a boyfriend, I just call him a new Steve.
I came across, and we don't want to divulge, any client information.
No, absolutely not.
But I came across a story of a divorcing couple, and the father was told, definitely, wait. This is a new divorce. The children need to adjust, and so his response was, well, I'm introducing her as just a friend, and we're going on vacation as just a friend. And I can guess what you're going to say, but let's hear it.
Well, my thought would be, how silly do you think your children are?
Yeah.
Children are very aware of a lot of what goes on. And I think also, even if they don't know, there's going to be questions there in their mind. And what is this? And I've had kids, typically in the clinical side of my practice, who have talked to me and said basically like, this is my dad or my mom, do they think I'm an idiot? And they resent that. Children resent it when their parents are presenting something as one thing, and they really get the idea and begin to know it's something different.
And it models dishonesty. It really does, which is not something you want to teach
No,
your
I don't
children.
think so at all.
Okay, so you described for us what happens in the Alpha program. Generally a 2-hour meeting, focus on making the decisions to develop a good co-parenting plan. You come up with a written plan, and then they move into building the finances around whatever they decided is best for their children. Tell me what happens when you're not in the Alpha Step program, 7-step program, and you're dealing with people that have 2 separate attorneys and are working through what we call the divorce litigation system.
Right. Where I become involved in that system, typically in Bucks County. I know Bucks County the best. When parents are separating, divorcing, and they're in disagreement about what is occurring with their children, one of them is going to petition for a custody plan against the other. And they'll often have their own attorneys or represent themselves, and that will usually involve going to what's called a master's conference. And they sit down with a master who is a staff of the court, who will sit down and try to help them come to an agreement regarding custody. And if the parents don't agree at that point, the master will usually recommend, well, get a custody evaluation.
Can I just back up a little
Sure.
bit? Before, you said some of them are represented and some of them are not represented, but they're approaching it as though
It's a conflict.
it's a conflict, that
Right.
they're enemies, there's going to be a winner and a loser.
Typically, that's the idea.
Yeah,
of it, yes.
and sometimes it is so inflamed that they're fighting to the death.
They're usually trying to amass information that's going to support their side against the other parent.
I think of it as a mudslinging contest.
Very often.
Is that a fair assessment? It's not about proving that you're a great parent. It's about proving that the other person is a bad parent.
That often comes up a lot.
Yeah.
I would have to say that in a lot of the custody evaluations I do, a thing that not all the parents, but certainly very often what they're doing is, if they're not directly stating it, they're trying to put information in saying that this parent shouldn't have custody because of these reasons.
Okay, so I interrupted you.
Sure.
So this couple, a litigation couple, been seen by a master, tried to settle it, couldn't settle it. They may or may not have opposing attorneys, but they get referred to you by the courts, right?
Well, what will happen in a lot of cases, the court does not want business. Judges are way overbooked. They're not looking for cases. So rather than have it go to a judge, and in order to provide the judge with more information to use in making a decision, if it comes to him or her, the master will often recommend a custody evaluation. And they'll suggest in Bucks County, you can go through what's called CCES, which is a process that the county works with certain evaluators, a group of evaluators who can do the custody evaluations, and they tend to do it at a reduced fee and make a recommendation to the court as to what's in the best interest of the children. They also do try to help the parents come to agreement. If the parents don't want that, they can go to a private evaluator, which is going out and finding a person who does custody evaluations privately and hiring that individual. The parents have to agree. If the parents don't agree, a judge may pick who they go to.
Okay. Is there ever a circumstance where they each pick a separate one, or they, in the litigation system, they always arrive at one?
I'll never say always, but you typically want one custody evaluator. And if the parents can't come to an agreement about that, very often it'll be something where each parent submits several names, and then sometimes the judge will be the one who picks out, okay, you're going to go see this one.
Okay, so let's roll it forward. They said they couldn't, this hypothetical couple couldn't agree, and so the judge says, go see Reb Brooks.
Right.
Tell us what happens.
It happens a bit differently depending on who your evaluator is. But typically what an evaluator is going to do is meet with each of the parents. The way I do it is a little different than the way a lot of people do it. When I do it, I meet with each parent individually, and then I meet with them together. And then I meet with the parents and the children. And then I meet with the parents together, another meeting with them together. And during this time, I'm getting information on who else I need to be contacting. If there's other spouses, they have to come in for an appointment, and I evaluate them.
So you're meeting with the children, too.
Oh, absolutely.
The
children,
so they're pulled into
are
it.
A big part of it. And nobody, I don't know of anybody who would ethically do a custody evaluation without evaluating the children.
So what an experience for them.
It's stressful. A lot of parents say they don't want to involve their children in this, and that's good thinking. It's tough to bring children into a custody evaluation because the children are then put into a situation where they can pick up on it usually that, oh, this is about, I'm supposed to choose one of my parents. And children typically don't want to do that.
And people, I know in our 7-step program, we're dousing the fires and we're focusing on positive co-parenting. But in the litigation world, there are probably, some very angry people that are coaching the kids even before they get into your office and making them feel like they have to choose.
Well, that's one of the things that a good evaluator is trying to assess when he or she meets with the children is, have the children been coached? I can tell you of a situation I had where a child walked in, the child was probably 8 years old. First things out of their mouth was, my daddy drinks too much. And I hadn't even asked a question. And it's kind of like the child. And then, they said a couple of other things. And it was clear to me, and I was thinking, this child has been told a list of things. Get this out. Make sure you say this. And this child basically was just going in and saying, I'm supposed to say this. I'm supposed to say this. I'm supposed to say this.
Wow.
But an evaluator is trying to assess, is this child genuinely saying these things? Or is this something they've been told to say? Or something they've been given the message, try to say this sort of thing. And it's a painful, horribly painful situation for children to be put in that position.
And I'm sure over the years you've amassed many memories of kids who have been tortured by their parents' divorce through the litigated
Well, I've had children come in and just basically, I've seen children who have been through this process far more than one time.
Oh, no.
And they've come in and just said, I just wish this would be over. And
that's so sad. Because we're here to protect our children, and yet they're being put on the front lines as the soldiers in the war.
Right.
Yeah.
And if it's a young child, one of the questions I will often ask them is, what would you wish for if you had 3 wishes? And I can't tell you the number of times that I've heard things like, I wish my parents wouldn't be fighting. I wish this custody situation was over.
And we're talking about when they're going through the experience of their parents' divorce. Can you just touch on what happens, roll the clock ahead years, after that, how this impacts their lives?
I think that very often in situations, children feel that battle doesn't stop there. They're in a situation here, and very often with the custody process, it comes down to very often one side winning or not winning. And when that occurs, usually the losing side feels a need to go back and fight it again. I can tell you, I saw one boy that he was, I think, 12 years old when I saw him, and the parents separated when he was 2 years old.
Oh my!
And they acknowledged that they had been in court at least once every year since the child was 2 years old.
And I'm sure that they both loved that child.
I think they did.
But yet they put him through such hell for all those years. What do you think that meant for his life going forward?
He didn't know where he could be. When he was at his mother's home, he felt like he was betraying his father. When he was at his father's home, he felt as though he were betraying his mother. And I think he just felt like, I'm not comfortable anywhere. No matter where I am, I'm doing something wrong.
That's so sad. Okay, so that's while he's still at home. What about when he goes off to college, he meets somebody, he gets married? Are there long-lasting impacts of a high conflict custody battle?
I'm sure there are, and I've talked to people who've said, I can remember one recently who said, "Get married? Are you kidding? I'm not going to bother with that
because of what
they experienced with it and what they observed with it."
Okay, well that's pretty chilling,
right?
And that's the emotional, the long term, the immediate and the long term effect on the children.
One thing I would also say, just that idea of the coaching and things like that. I have seen situations where, and I encourage this of parents who are out there listening to this, think about the long term in that that parent who is, at times, there are legitimate reasons to try to restrict a parent's time with the children. That parent is not safe, they don't have good judgment. Absolutely. Those things occur. But there are times where children are told bad things about the other parent, and they're turned against the other parent. And as that child gets older, they start to realize, that's not true. That wasn't true. And the parent they end up resenting the most is the one who did not support their relationship with the other parent.
Yeah, that's a bit of karma, isn't it? I think they call that parent alienation.
Well, that is an extreme form of it, yes.
So we know the emotional toll is horrific on a child. Let's talk about the financial toll. When parents go through our 7-step divorce mediation program, they get a very reasonable fee. It's a flat fee. They know what it is up front, and it gets them through all of their decisions and launched onto their next life. We're here talking about just one part of the litigation experience, and that's the child custody. Can you give us any idea of what this costs parents financially?
I can certainly talk about the evaluation side of it. Through the program that the court supports, and that does not involve, none of the evaluators there go to testify in court, and that's a difference with that.
Well, what happens if they don't testify in court?
The court has agreed to accept the evaluation.
So it's just a written evaluation?
It's a written evaluation that goes in. In that case, most likely the evaluation itself is going to cost about $2,000. Now, if you go into a private evaluator, most of those are going to cost probably between $7,000 to $10,000. And then if it's a situation where the evaluator has to go to court, it's going to go way up from there because you're paying for the evaluator to, I can remember one time being called to go to court on a private evaluation. I sat in court all day long, and I never got to testify.
And you had to charge by the hour.
And I charged by the hour because it took me away from my office, and I had to make an income. So they paid for that full day of time, and my services, they had to have me come back the next day. And they're paying for their attorneys.
Well, that's the other piece. That's the other piece of it. If you can just throw out a number, the highest that you've seen people pay in your fees, or anyone's fees, just to give people bulk, because people going into this experience, they have no idea what it's going to cost. It's not like the Alpha program where it's X amount of dollars and that's it. It's just you're billed hourly, and it just keeps climbing and
Right.
climbing. So can you just throw out a number of
I've heard of custody evaluations. This is the evaluation, not the attorney's fees, of costing $15,000 and $20,000,
okay,
and that doesn't include any any of the attorney's fees.
And the attorneys are billing $300-400 an hour.
I think they do.
And so you can pretty much triple that for the attorney's fees. So easy to get to 50,000 on the custody.
I would think it probably
Easy.
could be.
Yeah, easy. So that's money, and I think of it as you can send your lawyer's kids to college, or you can send your own kids to college.
I think
So,
that's true.
so settling and going through our mediation program is going to keep more money in your pocket. You're going to have better vacations with your kids. You're going to have more money to help them move forward in their lives. So to me, that's a no-brainer.
I think also it lowers the emotional conflict. I think it's really important for parents to look at the fact that custody, this is not a win-lose situation. The more you can look at it is, how do we figure out what is best for the children?
Yeah.
And there are times that doesn't work. There are times it doesn't work, and you're not going to get there unless you go the litigation route. But I think that is not nearly so often as people end up there.
Yeah, I think it's the default because it's been done that way, which is why I say come in for a consultation. It's free, and you'll learn a lot, and you'll get on a better path. Because I think what happens is when you make decisions in mediation, you've done it on a sensible basis with the help of experienced professionals. When you go into litigation, things are litigated. You're banging heads. So in our program, let's roll the clock ahead, and you've got a child that now needs braces, which are a year of college tuition, I think now. And in our program, there's a working relationship. They can make those decisions, and we actually have a formula in the agreement for making those decisions ahead. If they've chosen litigation, guess where they're going? Back to court.
Very often.
And paying attorneys, and just, it's sort of like wherever you start out, whether it's in our program, 7-step divorce mediation program, or litigation, that's where you're going to stay. And we've had people switch tracks. Like, we've had people come in from litigation after spending, untold sums and getting nowhere. Finally, the light bulb goes on, and they make the call, and they come in, and we get them through the program, and they're very grateful. But a lot of times, I wouldn't say a lot, maybe half the time, when they want to switch tracks, they are so infused with that litigation mentality. It's them against us, and that it's difficult for them to make that transition.
Oh, I think so.
Yeah.
It's kind of like you get stuck on the track, and and one thing leads to the next, unfortunately. Working to come to agreement, I think, tends to foster that. Engaging in conflict, trying to win the situation, I think you feel compelled to keep trying to win.
I want to touch on one more point. And so we've talked about the emotional experience and how horrific it is for a child to go through a litigated divorce. And it's no picnic going through, through our program, but at least it's, there's a lot of attention paid to their needs. We've talked about the financial aspect of it. Let's talk about the time element. I know in our program we work hard to get people through within 3 to 6 months, because we don't want them in that limbo. We don't want their children in that limbo. And we say we don't want you moving too quickly because you're not taking the time to think things through. On the other hand, if you take too long, you're staying in that awful limbo. Tell me the timeline. I know for divorce litigation, it can be 2 to 3 years. Tell me what you experience in terms of just settling the children's issues through a litigated court.
Well, as I said earlier, I was astounded when I found out through Alpha we did it in 2 hours.
Mm-hmm.
And that doesn't mean that the parents aren't thinking about this and negotiating it and coming up with it in their mind. And that's far more than 2 hours. But the process of coming up with that agreement is usually about 2 hours. A custody evaluation, even the quickest custody evaluation itself, is going to take, 2 months would be quick. For just the evaluation. And I say that's quick. I know that one private evaluator, it was rare that he would complete an evaluation within 9 months.
Oh my goodness. So that whole time, that family is in limbo, unresolved, and living on pins and needles, I would imagine. Yeah. That's startling.
And I think it does. I think you're right. It prolongs everything. And, the situations I will have people discussing in the custody evaluation, they're trying to figure out, okay, if the child's with mom, they're going to go to one school district. If the child's with dad, they're going to go to the other school district, whether it's primary or partial or that kind of thing. And they're trying to decide this, and it's June, and, I'm looking at them and saying, I don't know that you're going to be in court and have this decided before September. And so they're kind of in limbo. Well, where does the child plan to go to school in September or August or whenever it is?
Yeah, and it's really all about the children. And
it should be.
And as we said earlier, parents love their children, but they get so caught up in the battle. They've been fighting for so long that they don't realize, what it's doing to that child.
Sure.
And so, anything else that we should know?
I don't want to put out the idea that that there aren't reasons why parents end up in litigation. They do it. There's reasons for that at times, and there's times where you do need to do that in order to protect your child and make sure that your child is safe.
I'll just say in our program, we don't accept people into the program unless we think it's going to work for them. And one of the deal breakers for us is if there's abuse. You cannot level that playing field. And if it's abuse against a spouse or a child, then no. They need to be in their separate corners. They need that full protection.
And I think very often then an evaluation is warranted to really try and identify what are the safety issues here. The majority of cases, I don't think, meet that standard. I think the majority, if the parents were able to really work together and look at what's best for the child, remove themselves from it, what is best for my child, I think it's a much better process.
And it's interesting, all those 20 years ago, when I started conceiving this program, I had people tell me it couldn't be done. And I look back on it, I look at the thousands of people that have been through our program successfully, and the reality is it can be done. It is done every day. It's not easy, but it's not nearly as difficult as going through litigation. It's going to be over quicker. You're going to have more money in your pocket, and you're going to have a better co-parenting relationship. You're going to be able to show up at that graduation or that wedding and celebrate instead of being the source of angst and anxiety, not knowing, if there's going to be a blow-up or a conflict. So I think our program is wonderful, obviously, but I give most of the credit to the people.
Oh, absolutely.
They're good people in a difficult situation, and they make the right choice. When you enter this time of life, you can choose, okay, I'm going to go to war, I'm going to battle this, I'm going to prove a point, I'm going to hurt that person, whatever, or this relationship is ending, And how are we going to end it? Are we going to make the decisions? Are we going to land on our feet financially? And are we going to have a healthy co-parenting relationship? And there's more and more people choosing that, and I admire them. Good people in bad situations making good decisions. You can't beat it.
I think it's the way to go, if possible.
All right. And that's all we have for this evening. We appreciate your attention. We hope you've learned something, and we hope you'll tune in to our next Divorce Periscope program. They're held the first and the third Wednesday of every month from 7 to 8. And we hope to see you next time. And if you have any ideas about topics you'd like us to explore, please let us know. And we certainly will find an expert and make sure that we give you all the information we can. Hope you have a good evening.